Now it's clear that the transition towards a value creating yet resilient and regenerative use of renewable natural resources is therefore crucial in order to achieve a post-petroleum economy, decoupling economic growth from environmental impact and resource depletion. So to me, it's clear that the climate economy can provide a wide range of solutions to produce locally sourced plants and waste-derived materials. It can produce chemicals, fuels, I'm talking about renewable fuels, food and animal feed, replacing the need to resort to petrol-based solutions. But a number of critical barriers must be addressed for this to happen. And these include, for instance, cooperation and partnership, finance, skills, policy and regulatory environment, infrastructure, and many more. So my name is Youssef Travali. I am the executive chairman of All Sites Africa, a think tank and a policy institute. And I'm also a senior fellow with Friend of Europe, Brussels-based think tank. And it's my pleasure to be moderating this webinar today. So along with me, I have Sidonie Gouet, Program Director, Africa Coalition for Green Capital. Welcome, Sidonie.
Thank you, Youssef.
I have Anne Knappen, Policy Officer at the European Center for Development Policy Management. Welcome, Anne.
Thank you, Youssef. Happy to be here.
I have Habiba Dagash, which is a researcher at the Granham Institute in Climate Change and the Environment, Imperial College London. So welcome, Habiba. And then I have Victor Kabengele, Project Coordinator at the Ministry of Environment, Nature Conservation and Tourism. Welcome, Victor. So basically, the question I want to ask all panelists today is the following. Can Africa decouple economic growth from environmental impacts in the short and medium term? So basically, how can we shift the paradigm? And I will probably start with Habiba. And the question I want to ask you is, what are the opportunities in terms of innovative low carbon solution? And what does it mean in terms of energy investment, research and development skills?
Thank you, Youssef. First, I'll apologize. It appears that I can't, my video is not coming on because the host has disabled it, but I'll just continue speaking. So to deliver economic growth in sub-Saharan Africa, whether that's driven by heavy industry, manufacturing or services, that type of growth needs energy. So there will be a growth in energy demand to be able to deliver growth. So the challenge for sub-Saharan Africa is twofold: to rapidly increase productive energy supply and energy access, which has proven difficult in itself, and then to do so in a sustainable fashion, using cleaner energy sources that will be able to reduce the amount of the carbon footprint of that economic activity. The research that I and many others have done so far has shown that we need to significantly improve our capacities of renewable energy generation on the continent to be able to deliver greener growth. But so far, financing efforts, particularly within the energy space, have concentrated on small-scale solar projects, principally through off-grid and mini-grid systems. Much of the funding that's come through FDI, channeled through multilateral institutions, have been directed at non-productive uses of energy. So these are typically smaller scale energy systems that serve uses such as lighting or use of basic appliances at the home. So already those types of projects do not translate into increased incomes and increased economic activity for the communities that they serve. Secondly, there's been very limited funding to innovation, just technology transfer. What I mean by that is the types of projects we're seeing on the continent are just smallest versions of projects that have been successful on the European continent and elsewhere. So there's two things that really surrounding particularly within the context of EU-Africa relations that need to be done to improve the innovation around the energy space so we can utilize cleaner energy sources. And the first thing is to think about financing for scale. So currently, there's only, outside South Africa, I think there's only about 80 megawatts of commercial and industry scale solar in sub-Saharan Africa. Only through delivering much larger projects will we be able to deliver the type of reliable electricity service that can drive commercial activity. Large projects will also drive down the cost of utility scale technologies that will encourage further investment down the line and reduce risk premiums. And secondly, it's about funding for innovation in itself. I mean, wind and solar solely focus on the electricity system. However, if we want cleaner, greener economic growth, we need to think about industry, we need to think about transport sector, we need to think about energy for agricultural use as well. So there needs to be a concerted effort into the basic research and development that's needed to design renewable energy systems for productive uses that directly fit into the African context. For example, within some of the work I've done with Nigeria, it's looking at renewable energy systems that can enable farmers to move up the agricultural value chain. So whether they can use the type of systems they can use to mill the rice that they grow and enable so that they can sell it on without having to go to through another miller or processor. So just to round off my opening statement is I want to highlight that the key, there needs to be in the EU-AU agenda, there needs to be a focus on creating partnerships for basic research and development of new technologies, cleaner energy technologies outside the electricity sector. And this could include improved biomass use in residential and transport sectors, whether through cleaner charcoal or biofuels. We also need to look at developing hybrid fossil fuel and renewable energy systems that can power commercial centers. And finally, it's about, in addition to that basic research and development, is also upskilling a new generation of scientists and engineers, but also financiers, lawyers, and policymakers to be able to deliver much more of these projects at scale. Developing local manufacturing capacity is critical to improving clean energy access and to avoid the disruption coming from dependency on international supply chains and the international political environment, such as tariffs, which in somewhere like Nigeria, we've seen has taken a massive blow to the solar power industry. So I'm going to stop there and I look forward to the rest of the discussion we have.
Okay, thank you very much. So Anne, listening to what Abiba was saying, I think for me it's clear that cooperation, partnership will be key. It's clear that building, so regional integration will be key. So building a conducive policy environment, policy and agricultural environment will be key. So what are the challenges ahead of us in order to build that environment?
Thank you, Youssef. Let me start by giving you a short introduction before going into three key challenges that I think exist when looking at Europe-Africa relations around climate. So first of all, you know that the current president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, she took office at the end of last year. And since the start, she has presented the new commission as a geopolitical commission and promoting a partnership of equals with Africa. We also know that her first visit outside Europe was to Africa. Apologies, but can you hear me clearly? Because there are helicopters circulating.
No, we can hear you.
Okay. In March this year, the European Commission presented its new comprehensive EU strategy for Africa, with again a reinforced emphasis on the creation of a real partnership on eye level between Europe and Africa instead of a donor-recipient relationship. And then we have obviously the European Green Deal that aims to make the EU carbon neutral by mid-century and to decouple economic growth from resource use. And this shows how important the green agenda is. At the same time, we know that the African Union is also working on a comprehensive climate strategy for the continent. So these are indications that Europe-Africa relations are undergoing a paradigm shift away from the development aid narrative towards a partnership of equals based on investments, trade, and business partnerships. So it is in this new context that we are finding ourselves. At the same time, we know that the EU-AU summit will be postponed to next year. It was supposed to take place at the end of October And I think that this may not necessarily be a bad thing, because delaying the summit would buy both parties time to sort out some long-standing divergences in the EU-AU partnership. And one of these divergences is actually action on climate change and the green agenda. So given these divergences, I want to ask whether a partnership of equals based on common interests would be possible. And let me dive into this question while looking at 3 areas of divergence. So I think the first one is actually adaptation. We know that there is nowadays a lot of talk on renewable energy, energy transition, and so on. But I think that still the first priority for Africa is, and for most African countries, is adaptation. And this is reflected by numerous African policies, including Agenda 2063. Also, when looking at the costs for adaptation, we see that if we stay within a 2-degree scenario, these costs could rise to $50 billion per year by mid-century for Africa. Also, when looking at the almost 50 NDCs by African countries, we see that there is a very strong commitment to adaptation, and especially adaptation in the agricultural sector is very important, because about 60% of African people are active directly, indirectly in the agricultural sector. However, when looking at the EU Green Deal, this does not mention adaptation very strongly. And even we think that for a geopolitical commission, the external dimension is rather weak. So also, if you look at this new comprehensive EU strategy for Africa that I just mentioned, we see that there is a prioritization for formal sectors, for productive sectors, for technology, as well as climate mitigation, at the expense of agriculture, the informal sector, which is huge in Africa, and also human development and climate adaptation. So that is my first point, the first area of divergence. Then this brings us to the next one, that's green finance or climate finance. There was recently, earlier in September, an ACT Alliance report published that showed that in 2018, less than 1/3 of climate finance by the EU institutions went to adaptation in Africa, and the least developed countries, the LDCs, they received only 14% of overall climate finance, the ones that actually need climate finance the most. Now, they were looking at all the EU institutions, including the European Development Fund, but also the banks, such as the European Investment Bank, that has allocated very limited funds, about 8% or so, to adaptation. And also, when looking at private sector involvement in climate finance, also in especially adaptation, this is still very limited. So I think financing is a second area of disagreement and of divergence. And then thirdly, that would be trade. So energy transition is also one of the core sectors, of course, for Europe-Africa cooperation on the Green Deal. However, we hear from our African partners that we work with that there is a fear that the Green Deal might lead to more protectionism by the EU. So there is a risk that the Green Deal can introduces more non-tariff barriers via a so-called carbon border tax. Now they call it the carbon border adjustment mechanism. It's still in process of in process of development. It's not there yet. And also the EU is thinking of higher environmental standards. So there is a legitimate fear, I think, that the Green Deal can promote new forms of aid conditionality. Another point when it comes to trade is, of course, the whole issue and the fear of stranded assets that I think we will discuss today. So what to do with the available resources that are not green, but that are still key to economic development and industrialization in Africa. So these were my 3 points. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So Sidonie, what I took away from Hannah is the importance of financing. One aspect is really financing. And I think the level of finance that is required, I think she mentioned at some point in time, 50 billion for Africa per year. So tell us a bit, how can we mobilize such amount of funding?
Thank you, Youssef. So I think I will answer it in 2 perspectives, right? So first of all, before responding to the question, how can we, mobilize those funding for Africa? I believe we need to, first of all, understand what is climate finance, because I do believe that if we agree on what is climate finance and what it should mean, then we won't ask the question on how do we mobilize it. So from when you speak with people on the ground and from the what I call here the international perspective, most institutions in Africa, project developers, I mean, most of the key stakeholders understand climate finance, as money, funding that is coming outside of Africa, to go and being invest in the green sector. And in a sense, it is true. Even, I mean, we are discussing within the framework of the European Union versus Africa. So the thinking that the climate finance should, be mobilized from outside partners is also part of the discussion that we have today. But I would rather not think about it from that sense, because I believe that when it's come to finance, be it climate or whichever type of sector, it has to be about how do we have projects that are commercially viable so that we can actually raise the necessary funding. And this is where it's coming, what I call the local perspective, which is really about, trying to, for at least, and here I'm speaking to project developer, I hope we have a lot listening to us. How can we design projects that are actually solving our climate priorities and that are in the same time commercially viable? Because for now, it is not the case. And that's why we are, it feels like something that is unachievable, because most of the projects on the ground, they are not commercially viable. Then the question is, how do you raise funding for those kind of projects? I will just give an example for you to understand clearly what are the issues at stake. I think if you have asked me this question a few years ago, what are the prospects of climate finance in Africa, I would have told you, oh yes, I mean, it is great. There is a lot of funding. We now have the Green Climate Fund. You have those, these, for example, the commitment of the European Investment Bank to switch and become, a climate finance institutions. You have, these institutions really committing to invest in the sector. So, I mean, everyone were happy. We went to, you talk with project developer and say, oh, you know what, there is this funding and you need to make sure that we are able as countries to tap into that those funding. But in the reality is that some of the funding are there, but they are not, I mean, the capacity, there is no capacity to absorb that funding. Why? Because most of that funding comes with specific criteria and requirements that are clearly not, that does not fit to the reality of the ground. So there is a mismatch between the funding requirement that is available and the needs from the ground. And the other main challenge that you face when you just dig into the sector is something that I believe Habiba talked about when it comes to energy, for example. We as Coalition for Green Capital, we tend to prefer the terms green than climate, because when it comes to financing, climate is just limited. So we believe that most of the issue should be about, green more than climate. And so one of the clear example that we find ourselves in the ground is that when it comes, for example, to energy, as Abiba says, most of the funding that has been available are clearly going, to access to electricity, mostly lighting, and sometimes you end up with big programs where you have one of the requirements as a collateral, for some for people in rural areas. They are asking them, for example, to provide cows as a collateral, to get a light. And this has been, let me use that word, just a nightmare for people, because when you talk to people, they will tell you, what, actually our priority in this party, our particular priority here is ensure that we are farmers, that the next year we are able, to be able, to have food on the table, because last year we had drought, and I mean, we need to fix those kind of problems. But yet the fundings that are available, at least the international ones, goes into, ensuring that people get access to electricity. Most of the time, you will have booklets, with these impacts, but in the reality, it's not really resolving, the direct, priority of the grant. So I believe that the paradigm should change. Yes, there is a lot of solutions that can be from the ground. The main one for me is about, working to understand how within the green space we can actually have projects that are commercially viable, and tap first and foremost into the domestic market, because most of the commercial banks, they will invest in commercially viable projects domestically, be it in green or not, be it climate or not. So I think the issue is not that there is no money, but the issue is that nobody for now has worked to find solutions that can make those projects commercially viable, to be able, to raise interest from the commercial banks. So okay. I will stop here.
Mm-hmm.
And
so thank you. I will come back on this discussion on projects that are commercially viable. But before that, I would like to give the floor to Victor. So Victor, if you can tell us a bit, what is your take and how we can shift the paradigm in this context?
Good afternoon, everybody. Let's say to give an answer to this broad question, in perspective in DRC, when it comes, for example, to shift the paradigm on the economic growth, for example, we say that we can decouple the economic growth from environmental impact, especially by supporting by commensurable financing in two sectors, mainly in energy, especially, and because as you know, especially in DRC, 90% of households are using charcoal as energy for cooking. This has an impact, enormous impact, a huge impact on forests, as you know. So if we have access for all to energy, let's say we have energy for access to all, especially for the domestic household, this is gonna help us enormously to shift, to decouple our growth development economic development from forest, which is our most capital resources, natural capital, and help also the industries to develop and to create more jobs. As you know, if you talk to the people at the rural area and ask them why you are cutting trees, you know that tree giving us a lot of biodiversity advantage. If you got trees, you got you got water, you got the soil is protected, you got a forest is a regulator for pluviometry, and you got a lot of advantage where you got forest. But cutting trees, you are making the forest to disappear. So what are you leaving to your kids and the kids of your kids? So they are embarrassed, but they say, okay, you know, we have no choice to do so only in order to make a living and to give money or make a living for our families. So if we got energy and there is a lot of industries who can work properly, because without energy, a lot of industry can't work properly in the country. They can create a lot of jobs, and these jobs can use in a rural area these people who are doing their business, who are getting the living of life from trees, from charcoal. That is the most first things we are battling to get energy first thing in the country in a large scale. And this energy, we looking for a mix of renewable energy. Like we say, DRC got plenty of hydraulic resources, and we can table on that. We got gas, and we can have gas for, we can provide gas for a household. So we are looking for a mix of renewable energy can put on disposal of economy at all level. And secondly, for agriculture. As you know, the DRC is a big country, 80 million of arable soil. So if we get an intensive agriculture system, which can not only secure food security for provide food security not only for the people from DRC, but even beyond DRC, that is going to be a good things to prevent a country to get rid of its, let's say, international currencies to import food for its population. You see, that is really a big problem for us. And secondly, agriculture, as you know, is the first driver of deforestation in DRC. So if we put order in agriculture, we can protect our forest. We can use agriculture not only intensively, but you can use it in the area like in Savannah, where in degraded forest, and protects the primary forest, which is very intensive in DRC. So that, I think we can, doing so, decouple definitely our economic from climate change impact. And to do so, we need definitely means. And the first means we are talking about is the financing. Financing means, but in our conception now, we think that the aid is not really giving a good outcome. We think that financial means can be a mix of a lot of things, and especially the investment coming in sort of concessional loans which can provide people to embark, especially the young entrepreneur, to embark and to make sure that they do something good, getting money, and going in a circle where you put money, you get your money back, and you got something on top, and doing something good for the country and for the global climate change struggle. But for this financial system also, we have to put online that for the green finance, we have to do everything we can to review, to let's say, to make sure that the forest carbon price is very, very low at this time. We're talking about $5 per ton. We can't do anything with $5 per ton today. To deforest 1 ton, to make 1 ton of emission reduction is impossible. Even the country like France, who got the statistic, they're looking around $60 per ton for emission reduction. So we have to do something to make sure that this must be a price which can help people to continue doing business, in this case of reducing emission from forests and other things, to make sure that the business that we're going to put in place is financially viable. Because DRC...
I have to cut you so that we can have time for discussion.
Okay.
I get the point, but I would like to challenge you all a bit, because I think there is a sense of urgency here. What I see happening is that Europe is transitioning to hydrogen. Europe is transitioning to non-renewable fuels. Renewable fuels, and it's happening everywhere. We are going in the mobility sector, we are going electrical, we are going hydrogen, we are going hybrid. And I have the impression that if we don't go into action, we're going to be quite dependent on technology and on the supply from outside. And then the issue with climate change will not, because basically will not progress. So what can we do concretely in order to get things moving within the next 5 to 10 years? Anyone wants to take the question?
But I don't know, maybe I can just give a quick answer. I think we need for Africa, let's say, for a country like DRC, we need a technology, let's say, update technology. We need finance on top, what we say, because that new technology means money, means a lot of money, which we don't have. But we can, like I say, a mix of financing to help us to get this technology we need, but also capacity building. That is very, very important. And then by the combination of all these, I think that we can move forward. Don't forget also that there is a historical responsibility somewhere which has not to be put under cover. See.
I think for capacity building, I think Abiba, you can comment on that, but I think we have a diaspora which is pretty strong in those new technology, pretty strong diaspora. We have network of scientists in Europe, in Africa, in the US, that are specialized in those areas. So how can we leverage from that in order to really address the issue of climate change and shift this paradigm? So it's not only about money. I think it's, we have the skills. I think it's about, I have the impression it's about the willingness to do so.
Yes, Habiba is first, and I'm happy to comment.
Okay, just to make a quick comment about the skills available in the diaspora. I think I will slightly disagree there. I think sometimes we overestimate the amount of skills and specialization, particularly within the climate change and within the energy space that we have, just because we have qualified people in diaspora. And secondly, it's in, when thinking about whether it's green growth or climate change, there needs to be local studies, local data available to design solutions on. And this is what is fundamentally lacking, particularly within academia. In the field that I work on, climate modeling, a lot of the estimates that come out about how climate change is going to impact Africa really are based on models that are built in Europe and in the US, not on data that has been collected in Kenya, in the DRC, or in Nigeria. And that is because of a lack of course, the educational institutions don't have a culture of scientific research, in particular in some countries like in Nigeria. So I think there is a huge scope within the next decade or two for those collaborations. Yes, we can collaborate with those that have skills in diaspora, but the research can't continue to be done in research institutions in the EU. We need African universities to go out, collect the data that is needed, and we need them to design solutions that are suitable to the local context.
Anna?
Yes, yeah, I would like to add 2 points. I think it's partly already covered. Like, I think what is important is to raise awareness, and I think that's quite a long process. Before I worked in Asia, also on climate policies, it was adaptation, but I saw that there in many countries, like in Vietnam, it took a long time before people at different levels have this all of society understanding of the impacts of climate, and also that it's in the long term, it's economically more interesting and viable to make these investments and to transition towards to achieve green growth. But I can imagine that for many African countries, because of stranded assets, because also of recent investments that have been made in coal and a very strong interest in still deploying fossil fuels, that they're also looking at political economy factors behind these interests, and also looking at short-term financial gains, that this transition will eventually be possible, but it will be delayed. And I think also, like Habiba was saying, data is very important, data generation, but also sharing data. And another point is that, so we have this European Green Deal. I think it would be interesting also for cooperation with Europe to think along the lines of creating a kind of African Green Deal. So there are now, the African Union is in the process, as I said earlier, of creating a climate strategy, but even thinking about what does green growth mean for Africa in the short, but also in the long term. And then another possible pathway, I think, to work towards green growth is also the whole process now of updating the nationally determined contributions, so the NDCs. I think what I heard from African people we worked with, they have been made, they were set up very quickly in a hasty way, and they are often quantifiable targets lacking. So now they're in the process of reviewing them, and I think that would be very helpful to have very concrete targets per country, depending on the situation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there any question from the audience?
Maybe,
yes, so I have a question from, yeah.
Maybe.
Wait, I have a question from yeah, Tefera.
Hello.
Yes. Can you introduce yourself and then ask your question briefly?
I don't know if I'm muted. Do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Thank you very much, Eacho Tefera from the Institute for African Studies here in Slovenia, otherwise a part of ADEPT, the African Diaspora platform in Brussels. I'm happy to have this discussion. if it is about making entrepreneurship on the expense or in the climate sector, then what are the motivating factors at the national level that can engage the entrepreneurs, be it the diaspora or any other entity? So the renewable sector, which the European Union is trying to increase up to 2030, as you know, the Green Deal, it is also on the expense of land grab. So the gentleman said, if you can comment about how national governments are, how close or far each African countries are coping up with the Paris Agreement, vis-a-vis the Paris Agreement in terms of NDCs. This is one. The second one, the Green Deal, I think I was a part of the Agora sometime at the European Parliament, but it is on the expense of land grab in Africa, and that kills biodiversity and other eco entities. So if you can comment about how far some countries are making, or how far is the African countries prepared in terms of the Paris Agreement on NDCs.
Okay, thank you. So if I capture well, it's a question for Anna and Victor, or just?
Yeah. Okay. Just the other one, one of your, the data collected, I think it was Habiba, yeah, I think most of the data collected are from Europe and Africa, yes, or rather Europe. Yeah, we do also model on climate change, but if the data are collected through satellites, most of them are real time, and they are collected from Africa. I agree with the research and development investigation in Africa, or rather investment, because most of African governments do not invest in the research or to the universities. Therefore, I think it is it's a good deal, a good idea to encourage them to do that. But if aid, beyond aid, as I was invited by our director, Karin, actually aid, you know, out of the more than 60 billion, or roughly, from Europe to Africa, so-called, most of the money is not effective. So I think out of that one, we should be in a position to question the effectiveness of aid, so that knowledge can be organically grown in Africa. There are many talented scientists who are working on climate modeling with the African governments, but the funding and also maintaining them in Africa and bringing results based on the African circumstances. So I think that one, this is just for Habib, a kind of comment. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So before asking the panelists to answer, I will ask Okoye to ask his question.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you, a bit far, but.
Okay, yes, I'm trying to get closer.
Better now.
Yes, so introduce yourself and you can ask your question briefly and direct your question to one of the panelists if possible.
Okay, yeah, my name is Beverly Okoye. I work in Ghana. I work for the Foreign Office, the UK Foreign Office in Ghana as a climate change attaché. And so thank you very much for this webinar. It's really, really timely because it's exactly what we're talking about in Ghana ahead of COP26. So one of the questions I have is really about the NDCs. I think it was Hannah that mentioned that the NDCs for developing countries, the need is for them to be a little bit more ambitious. And as she rightly said, a lot of countries are currently updating their NDCs. But what is it that we actually want to see in the NDCs is my question. I feel for Ghana, the NDCs were already quite ambitious, and given the pandemic, they're going to be even more ambitious. And it's just, the more ambitious they are, it just comes down to the more money that is needed. That's me looking at it from a simplistic level. But I'll just be interested to hear from Hannah, what exactly do we need to see? What are we pushing for in this revision that would make it, in quotes, better revision? So that's one. The second question is really about raising the opportunities in the diaspora. A lot of times we come across people saying the diaspora are the missing link. You know, they're almost like the jewel in the crown. You know, we can really kind of mobilize the diaspora to kind of raise awareness of the opportunities in Africa in terms of a green revolution. How can we do that? I just wanted to kind of dig down practically how we can do that in terms of what networks are available, what events are available, what can be practically done. Because I think the diaspora, I am a diasporan myself, so I think the opportunities and the will is there. But I guess the problem is, well, what do we do? How do I connect to the opportunities? So I'd be quite interested to explore with the panel what the opportunity, what the portal is, what the conduit is, what needs to happen to engage the diaspora. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you very much. So basically, we'll answer the question. So maybe Sidonie, I will ask you to comment a bit on what we can do to really make aid more effective. What can be done very specifically?
Thank you, Youssef. This is actually a great question. You asked the question, what can we do to make aid effective? My answer is that we don't need aid in Africa. So let it be clear that we don't need aid. And I believe that Han says that one of the major shifts on the new strategy was trying, you know, to have a cooperation which is different. And I believe that what we need actually is really, I would say maybe friends than, you know, helpers, because I think the issue
You are muted.
Sorry. So the issue that we have. So sorry for the noise. Huh? It's now back. So I was saying that the issue that we have, and it's linked also to some of the questions that some participants have asked. I believe the last question on the diaspora. How can the diaspora be a conduit here? I think that is about, again, I will come back to that because for me it's really important, is projects, is about the projects on the ground. And how do you make, you know, projects that are actually responding to the needs in the ground? Because once the projects are providing solutions for people, then everything, I mean, then you have the financing, then you have the skills, then you have everything coming out. The thing is that the way today, and this is my perception, I might be wrong, but I'm speaking based on having today, I'm managing a portfolio of 9 countries in Africa across the continent, so North Africa, Eastern, Southern, and West Africa. And this, and from that perspective, and I think something that's coming from all those regions is, again, that most of the countries, when it comes to the NDCs, and the climate priorities, everything is being designed not in a wholly perspective, the development perspective, being able so you have climate strategy, you have green growth strategy, which are most of the times, yes, trying to align with the national strategy. But when you read those two, you feel like it's not part of a holistic thinking. And meaning that because the way we have approached those questions around climate change was not about trying to solve the local problem. It was about, there is this funding, there is this aid policy, there is this money coming from the Europe, from everywhere. How can we tap into that money? It wasn't, we have this particular flood management problem. We have this particular problem in drought. We have this particular problem when it comes to water or, energy. And then how can we solve that? How can we build? Everybody is talking, I heard my colleague from Congo saying about, talking about the biomass issue. The biomass issue is a clear issue. And today I can tell you that most of the solutions that are being talking about on the ground, they are not working. But I think that how about, okay, let's people for now cutting trees, but also once every day that you are cutting a tree, you are planting another one. Why can't we have those kind of basic solutions, for example? Nobody is talking about them. So for me, I think that I will end up by giving you just an example of what the whole issue has been on the ground. It's like you have someone who does not have money, who needs to feed itself, and everybody is proposing him, solution about doing some diet, because they are telling him that whenever you will have something to eat, you might get some weight. So you need to, have those solutions. So this is the problem we are facing, where the solutions and where the whole paradigm that we are facing ourselves are not and are really not responding to the needs of the people on the ground. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, Anne, I'm turning to you. I think we heard that we need a more ambitious NDC. Sidonie is talking about projects that really make sense. I mean, it looks like we have an opportunity for the EU-Africa collaboration here, because what I see is that in Europe, for instance, we have the BBI initiative, so the Bio-Based Industry Initiative, which is very interesting, something we can tap in. We have CO2 Valley Europe, which is a consortium of industry working on carbon capture and utilization. So all those networks are clear opportunity for this collaboration. So how can we integrate all those very good initiatives happening here in Europe, in the NDC, and make the NDC much more, let's say, ambitious? Because from a pure technical or scientific, from a scientific standpoint, I see a number of interesting solutions. I think today we are producing green methanol in Iceland. We are producing renewable diesel in Germany. We are doing waste to product here in Belgium or in the Netherlands or in the UK. So all those technology, and we are producing hydrogen also, green hydrogen, and those are portable solutions which can be easily deployed. So how can we integrate all those things in the NDCs and make them much more ambitious?
Okay, thank you. Very good question. Lots of things to answer. Well, I think first of all, the NDCs are really a wonderful initiative because it allows countries all developing to spell out what the climate risks are and then what's needed. But for example, I'm now working on Tunisia, and if you look at the NDC there, they spell out that they would need an $18 billion investment for energy and only $2 billion for adaptation. But there, as I said already earlier, it's not very concrete yet. And I think most countries are now in the process of concretizing this further, or of what type of exact projects are needed actually to meet the needs. But I think it was a question by Beverly on how to finance them. And I think it's a good, like some people said, not to expect aid to cover this. Also, when you look at the upcoming multi-annual financial framework for the next 7 years by the EU, the entire budget is 1.8 trillion euros. Out of that, 70.8 billion, which is quite, it's not a huge chunk of the entire budget, would go to the Neighborhood Development and International Cooperation Instrument. So that means, and this goes to also health and so on, to other sectors, not only climate. Climate will be mainstream, 25% has to be dedicated of this budget to climate, but overall it's not huge. And then if you think about the Green Climate Fund, that also should meet some of the needs that are spelled out in NDCs. They are not able to meet the $100 billion target there. So this is all very limited. Then you can also look at the private sector playing an important role in investing. I think there are quite some success stories when looking at investments in energy. I think especially you can think of examples in North Africa. Also, I know that the EU is interested in investing in energy projects in Tunisia, for example. It offers quite a stable investment environment. But when it comes to adaptation, which I said at the beginning is still a very important priority, there it's much more difficult for the private sector to invest. And also there, I think though that there are good examples. There is the African Development Bank created an adaptation benefits mechanism. They're also working through an African Alliance on climate finance, working with central banks. There are some good examples in Nigeria. So here and there, some small successes and interesting innovative mechanisms are popping up. But one more point I wanted to make about the NDCs is that usually these are a product of environment ministries in countries. And I think that's they are the most specialized people, of course, when it comes to climate and environment, but at the same time, you risk to create a silo approach. I think when updating the NDCs, you need to there should be an outcome of a discussion with all sectors. What are climate risks to the transport sector, to infrastructure, to health, education, and there should be really the final product should be an outcome that reflects the needs and interests of across the board. And then also this should then be reflected in the domestic funding and the share that goes to climate related and energy related projects from the domestic sources in countries. Yeah, thank you. I'll stop here.
Okay, thank you. Victor, any further comment on the NDC and how we can make them more ambitious?
Yeah, I think NDC is for the country like in Africa a kind of development plan as well. And it's very important to make sure that what we got in our NDC is taking into account all the sectors which it can impact on the climate change, all the sector which can effectively impact on climate change. That's, for example, in the case of DRC, we are revising our NDC because in the first place, the initial NDC, we took only all the sector relating to, let's say, agriculture, forests, and things like that, because it's the most emission sector, 70% more or less. And today, we're revising it, taking into account sector like public transport. It's very important. In a town like Kinshasa, it's a town of 12 million people. You can't rely commuting these people only on cars. on their own vehicle or on buses. It's very, very complicated now in DRC, in Kinshasa, for example, to move around. So public transport is a big emission sector. So we're saying how we can do our utmost to develop this sector and to make sure that this is included in our new NDCs. Secondly, domestic, what can I say? All the where is this going? I will find it. But the domestic déchets, like we say in French. So all these have to make sure that we take it and we manage it properly in order to make sure that we can transform it in methane gas or things like that and manage it properly. That is also a big issue because in a town of 12 million people, you see how much domestic déchets we can has every day on a daily basis. So I think it's important. And I will just want to make a comment on financial means, on financing, saying that we cannot shift the paradigm if we are not changing the way the financing is done today. Today, the financing coming in our countries, especially in Africa, is charged with a lot of international technical assistance, with huge salaries. Is impact with the a lot of what we can call executive agencies, with a lot of transaction cost, and in final, at the end of the day, the money which can be used on the field is not really what we need, or if you take it in percentage, is in some cases less than 50%. So if we don't change this way of bringing finance in Africa, in most of African countries like DRC, we are not gonna change the paradigm of supporting our country financially and making sure that what we are doing on the field can be replicated tomorrow and after tomorrow.
Thank you. So, Abiba, I get a question for you, which I received from the audience. It's a question from Beverly. She's asking that Ghana was an oversupply of electricity. How can they drive innovation?
Thank you. First of all, I think Ghana's oversupply of electricity comes from I think an issue with the power purchase agreements that they signed after the power shortage they experienced in 2014. So after a power shortage, I think the government went into overdrive and signed almost 50 power purchase agreements with the anticipation that energy demand was going to rise and growth, because the assumptions for economic growth were significant, and that demand never materialized. So they have all this surplus electricity. Because of the nature of the agreements, I think they're take or pay agreements. So it's already a sunk cost for the government, whether that electricity is used or not. The government will have to pay for it, and same goes for the gas contracts that they signed as well. And I think this presents even though it is somewhat an economic financial loss to the government, it also means they need to incentivize private sector to develop projects that can use that surplus electricity in the interim, which is, I think, where the ingenuity has been lacking in the last year or two. I'm not too familiar with Ghana's economic structure, but from what I understand from the PPAs, it's more of a question of that the power system is now oversized. I think the peak generation is double the actual demand. So I think it's for government to craft incentives, particularly for private sector, to invest in whether that's industry or manufacturing or services that will be able to soak up as much of that demand so that they can minimize the losses that they're making from those contracts that they've signed. Going out into the future, surplus electricity, really there's a room for a lot of innovation around green growth, whether that's channeling that to synthetic fuels. I think green hydrogen was discussed earlier, even though I'll say hydrogen is a much more difficult technology to manage because usually it requires some form of an established chemical sector. Because it's a very volatile gas and needs to be stored as ammonia. But there are others in Africa is rich with raw materials, whether that's hydrocarbons, and in using that with electricity, there are different ways that you can, create synthetic chemical products, and it's for the policymakers to assess the range of opportunities, whether it's electrolysis-based fuels, or whether it's whatever innovation that can be done in a relatively short term while those contracts are still effective.
Thank you. Actually, this question is really something very generic. I took randomly about 30 African countries, and what I see is that out of the 13 countries that I selected, 50% have more than 50% have, most of the country, there are more than 50% green energy in the energy mix. And out of these 30 countries, I observed that something like 5 or 6 countries have more than 75% in their energy mix. So basically, if I compare just Europe and Africa in terms of energy transition, I see that the African continent is actually leading the pack. We have very few European countries with more than 30% renewable energy in their energy mix because of their infrastructure, which need to be completely shifted to go to renewable. So this is really a kind of opportunity for the continent. And for instance, Congo is among the countries who have more than 75% of green energy in their energy mix. So this question about using this surplus of electricity is actually a kind of generic question that we need to address. And it's clearly an opportunity for green growth. So basically, my question to either Sidonia or Victor, it's how can you build on the comment of Habiba to see how through an efficient cooperation between Europe and Africa, we can put in place projects, finance projects, which can help us use this surplus of electricity. This potential surplus of electricity that we can produce.
Yeah, before answer that, I would like to say something about the surplus of electricity, and first of all, we are sure, I think it's Mrs. Okoye, that it's not just a Ghana problem, and also I would like to say that the problem, this is a problem that you can observe in I can tell you most of the East African countries where the the demand is really behind the generation, and I think that yes, sometimes the issue is because of the PPAs that were not really well structured. But I do believe that one of the issue here is again is thinking like okay, and I have heard that a lot during this discussion. We assume that we will be somehow develop like from but development is about planning, right? So we most of the countries, for different reasons, be it between, you know, the reforms and cooperation, some with the European Union went into, you know, produce a lot of electricity, yet the demand is not there. Nobody is trying to work on, you know, providing that demand. And the other issue is that, which is at least one of the issues that you can see mostly in East and Southern Africa, the issue of the transmission infrastructure, where sometimes you have those power plants, but there is a missing link around, you know, the transmission. And at the end of the day, we have, and it's linked to the NDC ambition, where we have that vision, you know, in 30 years, we will need, I mean, to double, triple, or our energy capacity, a bit in renewable, but yet the actual energy that we haven't found solution to use that. And what's happening on the ground is that when you talk with regulators and they won't tell you that publicly, is that in some countries, I won't name them, but there is nobody, at least from the regulator perspective, they don't want to sign any PPA anymore. But yet the same countries, those same countries have, you know, those targets around on the NDC. So just to say that again, and I'm really speaking here, we need to make sure that when it comes to the overall sector, it makes sense. It has to be holistic. The NDC ambition of those countries has to really respond to the issue on the ground, to the issue that we are facing, not tomorrow, but starting now. So I just wanted to insist on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have 13 minutes remaining. So I will ask you oh, sorry, I may have a question. I will check quickly. So there is a question from the audience for Victor. It's a question from France, sorry. And the question is the following. I think you mentioned the carbon emission taxes. Is it an option for DRC or the Global South in general? How to make carbon emission taxes socially fair and politically acceptable?
I beg your pardon. Can you repeat the question?
Sorry?
Can you repeat
the question is the following.
Yeah.
The carbon emission taxes, is it an option for DRC or the Global South in general? And how can we make those carbon emission taxes socially fair and politically acceptable?
Okay. I think that is an option also, a carbon emission tax. We are doing it, let's say, we don't call it carbon emission tax as per se in DRC, but we are doing it in DRC. We are taxing every bag of charcoal. We put a tax on it, is merely to discourage people to do these activities, and also to make sure that we got money to make the to replant as well. So this tax, this kind of tax is we will promote it in DRC. We start already doing it in, like I say, in charcoal. So socially, I think we can say it's fair, people understand, but it's putting a lot of pressure on the pocket of the people who are already poor, I understand. It's a way for the state, for the government to push them vers to another energy source, like the gas of town, like the gas we are using now, and we are promoting this kind of energy to reduce the charcoal. So it's a kind of incitation we are putting to discourage little bit this the charcoal using. So socially, I think is okay, and politically, I think is in a way, or where, like I said, government is a part of his vision. How can tomorrow, after tomorrow, he can definitely decouple energy of domestical energy for cooking from charcoal from the forest. So that is in the vision of the government for his sustainable way of managing the forest and its natural resources in DRC.
Okay, thank you. So I think we have 10 minutes remaining. I really want to give you enough time for your concluding remarks. So I will ask you to focus on the transport sector. And I really want you to tell us how within the next 10 years we can achieve the greening of the transport sector. And the reason why I'm focusing on that is because greening the transport sector will help us decouple economic growth from resource consumption. And it will help us make a clear progress in terms of climate change issue. And most importantly, it's very strategic because it is linked to energy independence of Africa. If we don't green the transport sector, we're going to end up in a serious issue in terms of energy independence. So what are your main recommendations, top 3 recommendations, that things that we should do now in order to achieve the greening of the transport sector by 2030, for instance? I don't know who wants to start. Habiba, for instance.
As I have the micro, I can carry on. Let's say for us, like I said, that public transport is very important in our the government vision to make sure that is really a very big emission sector in DRC. So we are doing, and the government is looking to get the financing and all the means to make sure that it can develop this sector and reduce people using individual means of transport. That is very important. So if European Union can help us, as is doing on his own political, to develop the public transport, because we know that is discouraging people on his zone to use individual means of transport. If we can help Africa also to go in this way, it's going to be really a big impact. And also, I would like to ask European Union to stop sending all the cars in Africa. Please, please, please. That is a big plea. Because all these old vehicles coming from Europe to our countries is a big mess. If they can put legislation, as like they put legislation not to get a product from Congo, from Africa, which is not produced with, let's say, in a sustainable way, please, if they can put also legislation preventing a vehicle more than 5 years to board Atlantic and to come in Africa. Is a big mess. So tell me how we're gonna do this Caracas is a lot of pollution and a lot of issues from our countries if they can help us in this way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, I don't know, Anne?
Sure. So I'm not a specialist on the transportation sector, but I would like to bring in the trade aspect. It's also a bit linked to what Victor was just mentioning on dropping and exporting, I'm not sure if that's the right word, old cars from Europe to Africa. But so going back to trade within Africa, I think, so what I understand is that the first issue is still access, energy access, and then how and then so once these needs are fulfilled, you can start talking also about what to do then with the surplus electricity, how to trade it. And I think what is interesting now are the whole discussions around the African continental free trade area and the idea of creating a single market. And I think also when talking about trade and transport, sorry, and using renewable energy, electricity for cars and other forms of green energy, this will be very important that this continental free trade area works very well for trade in green goods. And then secondly, I know that one of the pillars of the EU Green Deal is actually a circular economy plan, and they have also a specific focus on cars, on the comment that Victor was just making on how to avoid this and make sure that old goods are being recycled in an environmentally friendly way. So I think this is for the EU quite high on the agenda, but let's see what comes out of it.
Okay, thank you. Sidonie?
So I think that for me, there is two solutions regarding the clean transportation, because it is linked directly to energy, right? So the idea is, how do we develop renewable energies that we can tap into, you know, to use for transportation? Because for me, reducing transportation per se, I don't see how it's possible when we actually need more roads, we actually need, you know, more infrastructure for transport. And for town, for example, in urban areas, I will rather, you know, be promoting, you know, public bus transportation to limit the you know, the use of, you know, individual cars. But for that, you need to have, you know, great, you know, public transportation, because people are buying whatever car they can buy is because, first of all, there is no public transportation, or it is really, really not at least responding to the demands, and people are just finding their way, you know, to go to work and trying to do their part when it comes to the economic activities. So I think two things then: ensure that we develop massive public transportation, and then ensuring that we develop renewable energy that can be used by transport. You have efforts that are being done in Rwanda, for example, on that, where you have electricity, bicycle, motor bicycle electricity. You have a legislation that is coming on that part, and the idea is finding the way you can use cheaper electricity, you know, to power the transport sector. Thank you.
Thank you. And then Abiba?
So I echo the sentiments around improved public transportation and more efficient cars. But the first thing, particularly with regards to the cars, is to have equipment standards at the border when it comes to so that you can't just import any vehicle that's been used for 2 decades and continue to use it within the African continent. Second is also most internal combustion engines, so the most common cars used today, can actually take biofuels up to about 20% of the tank without modification to the engine required. So that's a scope for innovation. If funds can be channeled to using a lot of the municipal solid waste or waste biomass that we have around Africa to create biofuels that can be blended into existing engines already, I think that's a way to drive down some emissions coming from transport. And then 2 other sectors within transport, aviation and shipping. The International Maritime Organization already has a mandate to switch from marine fuel oil, which is really quite polluting, to use LNG, which produces significantly lower emissions. I think liquid natural gas generally is underutilized on the African continent. We tend to defer to coal quicker when natural gas can have up to 60 or 70% lower emissions. So I think creating the infrastructure for using more natural gas to replace more polluting fuels like coal, like marine fuel oil, can really help. And then finally, just on aviation, it's a sector that is so difficult to decarbonize because you can't use electricity just because of the battery is too big, or the amount of electricity you need to power the flight is too big. But then here's an opportunity for cross-subsidization, in the sense that you can get the aviation industry to fund the decarbonization of other sectors to drive down transport emissions. We spoke about carbon taxes briefly earlier, and them being politically or social equitable. And I think one thing that needs to be done if any form of carbon tax is implemented where there's in a developing country, is that you make the alternative cheaper. So you need to cross-subsidize. If you tax petrol, you need to maybe use that to fund biofuels, and that can help drive emissions. And I think there's a lot of scope to do that generally across the transport sector on the continent.
Thank you for those concluding remarks. I think what is clear, if I want to summarize, there are really, let's say, 4 groups of challenges. One is really about infrastructure. The second one is really about the policy and regulatory environment. The third one is skills. You mentioned the skills. And the last one is really funding versus innovation. And those are really the 4 areas in which we have to work, and along the line we need to think. And a very important point that was mentioned by Habiba, it's really, we have to think broader than, because transportation is not only cars, it's also air transportation, maritime transportation. So there is a need to take a sectoral approach in addressing this climate change issue, and in proceeding with the decoupling between economic growth and resource consumption. So with that, I would like to thank the panelists, so Habiba, Sidonie, Anne, and Victor, for your contribution. And also I would like to thank all the participants for attending this webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.